Well, because logic is just a process of the mind of proper inference, and logic is requires certain parameters. Otherwise, we're not being logical. Those laws of logic. And basically, that's just it. Logic is a process of the mind.
I would probably give a slightly different definition for logic there. I mean, I would say that logic is the science, or at least study, of valid inference. I think that would be the textbook definition.
You're the one with the PhD in this stuff, so no problem.
All right, good. So anyway, we're on the same page up till now. My analysis would be as follows. I say that essentially you're either committing the fallacy of false dichotomy, or if you repair the argument so as to avoid the fallacy of false dichotomy, you end up committing the fallacy of begging the question. It's begging the question. I mean, it actually reduces the argument to being equivalent to saying P, therefore P.
I was having a problem with a triple negation.
Okay. The triple negation is just a negation.
No, well, a triple negative is a negative.
Yeah.
So, where was I? But I don't have the precision that you would have in terminology and stuff like that, which I have no problem getting better at. No problem at all.
Take one of the options and negate it, and then you can conclude the other option. But the problem is, if the first premise is P or not P, now they are already just simply one of them is the negation of the other. They're both the negation of the other. So, and that's why it becomes trivial if you use disjunctive syllogism and have this P or not P, i.e. a true dichotomy is the first premise. Because
what do you mean by trivial? I didn't understand that when you wrote that.
Trivial means that the argument is equivalent to saying P, therefore P. Well, obviously that follows, but that's not an argument, right? It's just simply asserting that P and then saying therefore P, right? Okay. So if you say my argument that God exists, right? Premise one, God exists. Conclusion, God exists. I would say, that's no argument that God exists. You're just saying that he exists and then concluding that he does.
We just agree that it's the case that God exists, or it's not the case that God exists.
Okay, fine. Yeah, okay. So God or not God. That's the first premise. Now, for the second premise, it's up to you, but you pick one of those two options, God or not God, and you negate it. So you stick a not in front of it. So
that means God. Right.
Well, let's pick the first option, right? So the first option is God.
Right.
If we use that, then that means that we negate that option and we conclude the other option. So, so let's do that then. So it's God or not God, first premise. And the second premise is we pick the first option and we negate it. So that's not God. And then the conclusion is the other option, but that's not God as well. So that means that we've got second premise is not God, and the conclusion is not God.
But it's not a formula.
What do you mean it's not a formula?
You have to bear with me. I don't understand all the stuff you're saying all the time, but okay. I've not studied it. I'm a theologian, but I don't mind learning. I love it when non-believers teach me stuff. I don't have any problem learning. I said, God, now wait a minute. Let me ask something. I'm trying to understand.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I'd say, if you're going to say the negation of one, why not also say the negation of the other? And so I understand that, but it's something's not clicking in my head about this.
Give a different example.
I understand what you're saying, though. I do it. Let me.
I think it's easier to maybe putting God in there in a way is a bit of a distraction because you're thinking about God and you're not thinking about the form of the argument. So it's like saying that I'm either drinking whiskey or I'm drinking vodka. Well, I'm not drinking vodka, therefore I'm drinking whiskey. If the first premise is true, it is true that I'm either drinking vodka or whiskey, and it's also true that I'm not drinking vodka, then it obviously follows logically that I'm drinking whiskey.
Right. Absolutely correct.
But now if I say I'm either drinking whiskey or I'm not drinking whiskey, but I negate the option that I'm drinking whiskey, so I say I'm not drinking whiskey, but to follow the same pattern of reasoning, we would have to conclude the other option. The other option was that I'm not drinking whiskey, because I started off by saying either I'm drinking whiskey or I'm not drinking whiskey. Second premise, I'm not drinking whiskey. Then my conclusion is I'm not drinking whiskey. Now the problem with that argument is really there's nothing wrong with it apart from the fact that the second premise is the conclusion. And as you know, I think, but if you have as a premise your conclusion, that's begging the question. That's the textbook definition of begging the question. It also means we could forget about the first premise because we have the conclusion as the second premise. So we could just say, look, I'm not drinking whiskey, therefore I'm not drinking whiskey. Well, it's valid. Obviously, it's valid, but it doesn't tell you anything. It's trivial. Obviously, every proposition follows from itself.
I understand that. I understand what you're saying. But I just don't know if that's the right thing to do.
Well, so if you reconstruct the argument along the way that you initially said, that's exactly the way that it should be done. Either God exists or God doesn't exist, right? Then it's provable logically that the argument boils down to just saying God exists, therefore God exists. I mean, that's not up for negotiation. The problem is if you do that, then, like I said, it's logically provable, according to the rules of classical logic, that the argument then just sort of evaporates. It turns into P, therefore P, or alternatively not P, therefore not P.
You get me going, okay? So if I was in class, I'd be like this all the time. I always did that in class. Well, wait a minute, what about this? What about this? What about that? It's not because I'm arguing, it's because I'm trying to understand.
Mm-hmm.
What you're saying is, so
I said that there's two fallacies at play. So we looked at the second one, which is it's begging the question. And I think that happens if you reconstruct the argument so that you've got a true dichotomy.
So then we're going to say that we only have two possibilities.
Yes.
So let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
So in the case of the transcendental laws of logic, okay?
Yeah.
Would you agree with me to say that God exists, or it is not the case that God exists, those two options, that the necessary preconditions for intelligibility, whatever we want to, I know about the issue of what does a count mean. I understand that, but is it not still true then that those are the only two options we have to work with to account for, to give rational justification for these laws of logic?
No, so I say no as the answer to that question, straightforwardly no. If that were true, so you can start off with, well, look, I'm carving logical space in half with a dichotomy, either God exists or not the case that God exists. Therefore, one of them must account for the laws of logic. That's what you're saying. But I can carve logical space up any number of ways, right? I can say it's either the case that toast exists or it's not the case that toast exists. Therefore, either toast accounts for the transcendental laws of logic or not toast accounts for the transcendental.
But that's correct. It's not toast that accounts for them. That's
true. How does the absence of toast account for the laws of logic?
Because now I want to argue with you, but not to argue. I want to argue to learn, seriously.
Yeah, okay, fine, good.
But how does a state of absence do anything? It's a non sequitur to say the absence of that.
So you can't say, the empty set accounts for the laws of logic. That doesn't follow. So if you say to me something like, my house burned down yesterday, what accounts for the house burning down? Well, I'm going to take that to be something like a causal requirement, like why did my house burn down? I'm going to say, well, was there faulty electrics? Now that would account for it. Did you set the fire on purpose for insurance claim? That would account for it. Did I come and burn it down on purpose to hurt you? That would account for it. So these are causal explanations. But you couldn't get that by just saying, either I set fire to it on purpose or I didn't set fire to it on purpose. One of those accounts for it. The second one, the negation, doesn't account for it. It can't stand in a causal relation to the thing that we're trying to account for. You see what I mean?
Okay, yeah, but I'm still having a problem with it. And I'm trying to politely argue and disagree, but without being obstreperous. I'm just not following that.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote in their text, the ball or not the ball is the cause of the house burning down.
Okay, yeah, I see that.
So the case is, it was not the ball that caused, we know that is true. We know that the ball can't cause a house to burn down. It's just sitting there. So we know that it is not, it's true. It's not the ball.
What you want to do is say either the ball or the absence of the ball, either the ball or not the ball accounts for the house burning down. Not either the ball accounts for the house burning down or it's not the case that the ball accounts for the house burning down. It's where the negation goes. I get
what you're saying.
Yeah?
I do. I understand. So then you have not, which is the double negative, which is affirming the positive. So it's an tautologist.
Here, it's called a scope distinction, right? The wide scope where the negation negates the whole proposition. It's not the case that the ball accounts for the house burning down. And narrow scope, not ball, accounts for the house burning down. Does that make it, no. Does that make it less?
The ball is the cause of the house burning down, and the other option is the ball is not the cause of the house burning down.
Okay.
But the first one is false. The second one is true.
Yeah, I would agree. It's a false dichotomy, right? And the penny needs to drop here for you to see this. So on the one case, you've got the ball is the case, it is the cause of the house burning down, and the negation of that, the ball is not the cause of the house burning down. And then that's a true dichotomy. False dichotomy is the ball is the cause of the house burning down, and the negation, the false negation being not ball, is the cause of the house.
False negation confuses me because that's two negatives.
No, it's not about there being two negatives. It's about what am I negating? I'm simply negating the ball. I'm saying there's not a ball.
Right.
An absence of a ball is the thing that caused the house to burn.
Wait a minute. Not all is the cause.
Alex, are you saying the issue is over what we negate?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So Matt said either God or not God. And then he says, right, one of those two must account for the transcendental laws of logic. And I'm just simply saying, no, they don't necessarily provide any of the options. I mean, so for instance,
but if we say either God exists or God does not exist,
yeah,
that's valid, correct?
That's true. Yeah.
Now, in the case, if you can prove one of them, either one of them, false, does that immediately make the other true in that scenario? Just that.
Well, because those two are the negation of each other. So if one of them is false, then the other one is true. That's just the matter of the fact. Yeah. But my point is that look. So if I said to you, look, toast or not toast, right? There's no third option, either toast or not toast. It seems to me quite obvious that not toast, the absence of toast, like the atoastist, the person who doesn't believe in toast, right? That in itself isn't a position which can account for the laws of logic.
The ball is the cause of the house burning down. The ball is not the cause of the house burning down. So we would know that number two is the correct answer.
Yeah.
So far, so good.
Yep, absolutely.
So we could say something like God is the cause of the universe, or God is not the cause of the universe, for example. Okay.
And I would say 2 is right, and you would say 1 is right. There we go. Okay. But one of us has to be right there. But if you said God is the cause of the universe or not God is the cause of the universe, like either God's the cause of the universe or nothing is the cause of the universe.
That's it. That's what
right.
I'm thinking. Yes, because I wrote it in my notes. That's exactly what I was writing because you said, I'm going to just put my notes in here, the whole show to get into it. Either toast or not toast, and you said the absence of toast cannot account for the laws of logic. But how does a state of absence do anything? There's nothing wrong there. This is what I was thinking. To say the absence of something is a cause, that's where the confusion comes in for me, because absence just means nothing's there, but you can't attribute causation to nothingness. That's where I'm getting confused.
I agree that, obviously God exists or he doesn't, but I don't agree that, that means that either the Christian position accounts for laws of logic or the atheist position accounts for laws of logic. That's really where...
Right, that's not a true dichotomy.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. So when you say, but this whole argument, though, is you saying, it's either my Christian position or it's your atheist position. But then, no, now we've got loads of options, though, that you're,
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Because that's absolutely true what you just said, Alex. And I've hopefully many times have said look, I know that there are other options. There's the Hindu God, there's the Buddha God, or whatever, all these other options. I'm only going to argue from the Christian perspective. We could argue about those, but I said I'm only going to argue with the Christian one. And I actually remember saying recently, I'm only going to argue that in contrast with the atheistic position. Hence, I'm going to say God and not God. And logically speaking, yes, I understand there's other possibilities on paper, but I'm not going to argue those. Then, so we agree about all of them except for this one, the Christian one. And that's where our argument comes in. So I've narrowed it down for that reason.
Yeah, that's on one issue that we disagree, right? But maybe we also disagree on which ice cream flavor is nice. I like vanilla, you like chocolate. Well,
that's actually correct.
Okay, well, but does one of those account for logic? Who's to say? No, right. But why should
not a true dichotomy? Either ice cream accounts for laws of logic or doesn't.
But why should God or not? Why should Christianity or atheism account for logic? Why should either of those account for logic?
Well, that's a digression, because I try to get into that by saying that I'm only going to argue for the Christian God. And yes, I understand that there are other views of who God is.
I'm saying what I'm saying. Like, so yeah, I know that you're arguing for the Christian God. You're also arguing for chocolate ice cream, right? And I'm arguing for atheism and vanilla ice cream. But there's still another step. You need to say something about why why one distinction, God, atheism, matters to logic, whereas chocolate and vanilla doesn't.
Chocolate and vanilla are preferences and subjective, but the idea of God existing would be objective.
Yeah, but what's that got to do with the existence of logic?
That's the question.
That's the question I'm asking you. But my question to you is, why should I sell me now, give me your pitch, why God is relevant to this discussion?
Okay. Would you agree with me that logic is a process of the mind?
Well, no, because I just gave you only the conceptualist would agree to that.
Ah, okay. And I've actually said I've wanted to talk to someone who's highly trained in this so I can ask them the questions. So this is, a good opportunity for me. A thought, whatever the thought is, T for thought, that, and this is, okay, these are some of the things. Okay, I'm just going to tell you what's going on in my head sometimes when I think about these things. Like math, as you mentioned earlier, and I like the way you said it, and I forgot what you said, how you said it, but one of the ways of saying is, why does math impress itself upon matter? And I've been thinking about this, and I think the best explanation is God. Exactly, but that's what I'm saying. Then God just is. So that argument doesn't help. Doesn't do anything.
But that's fine. Okay, so you've got your position where there are so now we're just for some reason battling out between two versions of Platonism.
Let me ask you a question, a test question. Let's say there was a red steel sphere, just painted red, whatever. It's just a red sphere. It doesn't matter its diameter because there's going to be nothing else existing in the universe. Is the sphere red?
It seems to me that it's part of the setup of the example that the sphere is red. You said it's a red.
I would say no, it was not red because red is a perception.
But you just said it's a red sphere.
Am I correct? Sorry.
Let me just say this then. Look, so in your example, if I was a Platonist and you said to me, look, there's a red object, but nobody's there to perceive whether or not it's red. So this is like if a tree falls down and there's no one to hear it, does it make a noise? That's the sort of appeal you're making, because you're saying redness.
Yeah, because sound occurs in the brain.
Well, but you're saying redness only occurs in the mind, right? But not for a Platonist, not so for a Platonist, right? Redness is an abstract object. It exists in the eternal realm. So he says,
I think
why not? That's not a problem for a Platonist.
I would say that it is a problem, but I don't want to argue about that. But I think it is a problem because if
that's not.
We put a red ball in a room. We turn the lights out and there's no light there. There is no redness.
I don't think that you maybe. I mean, it's fair enough if you've never heard about any of these positions before.
Yes, I have.
Well, okay, fine. Well, in that case, then you shouldn't be thinking that that's an objection to Platonism, because it's not.
That's Platonism, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand, and I think it has problems, but nevertheless, we should get back to the. What's that?
It does have problems, but this isn't one of those problems.
I think it is, but.
Okay. I think that we had gone over sufficiently why, if you have a disjunctive syllogism where the first premise is P or not P, then, I mean, maybe you didn't accept me saying it at the time, but what happens is either way that you run the argument, you have to have the second premise is equivalent to the conclusion.
Yeah, I understand, but I don't think it's a valid assertion. I don't think the process is right.
Which process?
For 1 and 2, the ball is the cause of the house burning down. The ball is not, or the ball is not the cause of the house burning down. We have two statements, and we know that number 2 is the correct statement. And so we know that it's not, the ball is not the cause. We have B, or we have not B. Dang it. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then you're saying, so then it's not B, which is B. And then, but not B is equivalent to B, so it doesn't work.
So, well, why doesn't it work though?
Because it's becoming,
right there.
Because it's tautologous. Because the negator becomes a positive, which is the first premise. You understand?
Right. So the conclusion is the same as the second premise.
Right.
That's it. Right. And if you have an argument where the conclusion is already one of the premises, then it's trivial.
I think there's a problem, and I can't articulate. I can see it in my head, but it's like this: B or not B. I didn't put my punctuation in there. B or not B, and it is. We say, but it's not B.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what I think. The word "not" is changing its meaning. I think there's equivocation in here.
When I was teaching logic, if a undergraduate came to me with an essay and they'd said, look, whatever, blah, 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 it doesn't matter whether they took a philosophy of mind, philosophy of ethics, whatever it was, right? If it turned out that the argument boiled down to P or not P, not P, therefore P, I'd say, well, hold on a minute. Second premise, not P, that just means P. So you've got already your conclusion as a second premise. Therefore, you're begging the question. That just means the argument's trivial. It's not that it's invalid. Right? It's just that it doesn't actually substantiate into an argument.
But yeah, that's where I have the problem, because let me see if I articulate. What?
So if I said to you, look, I'm either drinking whiskey or vodka, right? Now, disjunctive syllogism doesn't care whether you negate the first option. So the second premise is always negating one of the two options, and the conclusion is the other option, whichever option you didn't use in the second premise. So
vodka or whiskey is not a true dichotomy.
Doesn't matter, though. Disjunctive syllogism doesn't need a true dichotomy. It just needs a true or statement. I say, well, I'm not drinking whiskey, right? Then you know that I'm not drinking, then I must be drinking vodka, right? It must be the other option. If I've negated one of the options, it must be the other. Now, I know that you understand this concept because I've heard you say it loads of times. You get it. You've got two options, you negate one of them, then it must be the other one. But it doesn't, the point is, it doesn't matter which one you negate. Just the rule is just negate one of them and you conclude the other. Right? So now let's just take that understanding of how disjunctive syllogism works and now think about if the first premise is P or not P. Now let's see, let's just take, so obviously there's two ways we could do it. We're going to negate one of them or we're going to negate the second one. The first one or the second.
Yeah.
Right? So
let's. What you're saying. You're negating either one, but you're negating, you're making invalid, you're making not true the other one. But not true is not the same thing as absence of. That's where I see the problem is. I think there's an equivocation going on. You're saying I just said it. What did I say? I just said it the way I thought. I forgot what I said.
So I say either it's false dichotomy when you say God can account for the transcendental laws of logic, or not God can account for the transcendental laws of logic. I say, hold on a minute, false dichotomy. Neither of those two options is true, right? And then, so reconstruction, let's make it so that it's a dichotomy. Either God can account for the transcendental laws of logic, or it's not the case that God can account for the transcendental.
No problem.
P or not P.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about now. So if it's P or not P, let's pick one of those two options and negate it as our second premise. So let's just run through this. There's only two ways, right? It'll only take a second. Let's say we negate P as our second premise, right? So the first premise, P or not P, second premise, not P, then the conclusion has to be the other option. But the other option is not P, because we started off with either P or not P.
You just lost me.
We've got P or not P, second premise not P, conclusion not P. Right? Now, obviously the second premise is the conclusion. So then that's true.
I understand.
Right?
It's a substitution.
The only way
something's not right. Something's just not right.
This is like checkmate. It is right. Unfortunately, I mean, I understand that it's because I'm speaking it that it doesn't sink in. But trust me, I mean, this isn't like very complicated, and it's just
I understand.
Logically provable that this is trivial. And
I understand.
Take my word for it right now.
I understand, but there's something wrong with it, and I can't put my finger on it yet.
A disjunctive syllogism with a dichotomy, a logical dichotomy as the first premise, is trivial. There's nothing wrong with that, and I can logically prove that. And that might have to sink in, but like that's game over. That's checkmate for that. You can't say, well, maybe the only way you could do that is if you say, well, I'm not using classical logic. I mean, I know how classical logic works. I can literally prove it to you how it works.
Okay.
In the strongest sense of proof, because a logical proof is really the only true sense of proving anything.
But it assumes certain things to begin with.
Classical logic, but then you were assuming that in the first place.
Yeah, but can you look at what I just put in there? Is that true, what I just said?
So you've said be or not be, and it's true that not be, therefore be. So what you've done in that argument is you've said either the first option or the second option. When it's not the first option, therefore it is the first option.
No, this one said, no, what I'm saying is, okay, I'm not writing it right then.
Okay, so do it the other way around. If the second premise, it's true that not be, therefore be, that's right. But then the problem with that is that two nots cancel out. They mean the same thing. So it's equivalent to just saying be, therefore be. Because not be is the same as be.
You were saying we could take either side of it, either the be or not be. If we falsify either side, the other is true.
Yes, absolutely, 100%.
So saying if not be is false,
that's like
then
not
be is true.
Yeah, so that's like saying if not be is true, then be is true.
That's what does it to me. That's where the problem comes in. It's a double negation.
It's false that not be is just saying
Look,
not be, and that's just the same as saying be.
Okay, we're not.
Three things are all equivalent to each other.
Okay.
Look, it's what you're saying now is equivalent to me saying either I'm drinking whiskey or I'm not drinking whiskey.
Correct.
And then you're saying, look, you're not drinking whiskey. Okay, but what's the conclusion?
No, it's either true. It's either true that you're drinking whiskey, or it's not true that you're drinking whiskey.
Right. Right. First, so that's the first premise. Now, what do you want your second premise to be? You've got two options, either this option or that option. Second premise. It's not the first option. Conclusion. It's the second option.
Okay, I got you.
That's disjunctive syllogism.
It so didn't make sense to me.
Right. The first premise.
Be or not be, not be, be.
No. That's not what I wrote.
Be
Let him do it
or
first.
not be. That's the first premise.
No. See, I see what you're doing, and it doesn't make any sense.
So option one, it says be or not be. Right? These are the two options: God or not.
That's not what it says. Sorry, go ahead and read it. That's not what it says, but go ahead.
Okay, premise one says be or not be. Right? That is what it says, isn't it?
You mean
that's the confusion here.
Be or not be? That is the question.
Yes.
Okay. Right. Let's just.
By the way, Matt, you just caught on to what's been going on in the Mixler chat because they've been making that joke for a while.
Okay.
Right.
So what you're saying it is be or it should be this way. But you're saying. I can follow this.
So let's say be or not be.
That's it.
First premise, right? That's the first premise. Now there's two ways we can go, and those two ways we can go are do we negate the first option, B?
Wait.
Second option,
Sorry.
not.
Okay, now is it not correct to say B, to say not, what I was understanding, that's B or not B?
No, that just says B or not B.
Because, well, then in this one, the hyphen doesn't mean not.
No.
No or yes. That's correct or I'm not correct?
A hyphen doesn't mean not if the word not is on there.
Oh, when you have the word not, you don't need the don't have to say double not dash thing.
The hyphen just means that it's linked to the next thing.
That's where Matt was getting confused.
Okay,
that's what was confusing the crap out of me.
To the B.
So now we can
Now that we can get back to about 15 minutes ago.
So disjunctive syllogism is very straightforward. It says if you've got two options and you know that one of those options is not the case, then you know that the other option is the case, right? Everybody understands it intuitively. It's very straightforward. You understand it, Matt. I think Andrew, Tim, anyone listening must understand that. I'm either drinking whiskey or vodka. It's not vodka, therefore it's whiskey, right? That's a very easy argument form. If you've got one option and the negation of that option, right? You do the same thing. You say, well, look, if it's not the first option, if it's not B, then you conclude the second option. The second option is not B. So if your second premise is not B, you have to conclude the other option, which was not B, and that makes it trivial because you're just saying not B, therefore not B.
That's what was confusing the bejeebers out of me. The not hyphen B was like, it doesn't make any sense.
Let's just cut through the chase.
Now I got it. Now I got it.
Like nots and ors and whatever. People listening probably don't know what the hell we're talking about, right? Let's just cut to the chase. All I'm saying, and this is very easy, you don't want to argue. Nobody, regardless of what premise they're arguing from and what conclusion they're arguing to, nobody wants to argue using disjunctive syllogism and having the first premise as, something and its direct negation. And I hope that maybe you can see that either way you go, you are going to end up with the second premise being the conclusion. Now that's just game over for that. I'd rather talk, because it's just straightforward. And what I want to do is, because that, as far as I'm concerned, that's been established. It's not, I'm not saying anything about God. I'm not making a theological point here. I'm making a logical point. And it's not a complicated logical point. It's a very, it's a rudimentary part of logic. It's not questionable. It's like, if you've got a king and he can't move anywhere, is it checkmate? It is checkmate. That's just sort of by definition it's done. So I'd rather look at the first way that you phrased the argument before, which was, if you've got God or, either God accounts for the laws of logic or not God accounts for the laws of logic. And the reason that that's a false dichotomy is because, well, you can't use the fact that God exists or it's not the case that God exists. It's nothing to do with it, right? In fact, it's a bad thing. The last thing you want to do is go to the logical dichotomy of God exists or not the case that God exists, because as I just spent 15, 20 minutes trying to go through, that leads to the argument boiling down to P, therefore P. So the last place you want to go
Alex,
is the logical dichotomy.
I'm curious, son.
I understand what you're saying. I'm going to think that through, though.
Do you think that Matt's argument itself, understanding how he's meaning it, do you think that is flawed, or is it just the way he's wording it?
Okay, so I am convinced that the way he's wording it is flawed.
Yeah, and that's what I've been hearing you say, and that's why I wanted to bring that up. It sounds like you're arguing over and what might be interesting is if you gave Matt a more correct way logically to.
Well, if I had a correct transcendental argument, I would believe that God existed. Right?
You do? No.
Yeah. I would not be in self-deception about the fact that God existed, right? So I'm not in that state. I don't know if there's a correct way of doing the transcendental argument for the existence of God. I don't know. I've never really seen.
Well, I'm saying as far as the wording of it, because that's what you've been spending a lot of time going over the wording.
Yeah, well, that's what logic is about.
Yeah, yeah. So the issue really being is there, what would be the proper way to make the I can't speak, to make the argument?
Well, my point is that either it's begging the question, as we've just gone through then, or it's a false dichotomy. I don't know if there's a right way of doing it. I'm not here to give you the right way of arguing for the transcendental argument. Sorry if that's what you wanted me to do.
No. What I'm saying, so the wording of it, would it be better to say it that, because like we had said, it would be logical to say the Christian God exists or the Christian God does not exist.
Yeah, that would be logical, but then you end up in trivial. You don't really have an argument if you start there.
Okay.
But if you do have an argument, if you start off with either God accounts for the laws of logic or not God accounts for the laws of logic.
Well, but would it?
It's a false starting point.
Why is it a false
Would it be
dichotomy?
more accurate to say either God? Hold on, for the phrasing of it, would it be more accurate to say either God is or is not the cause of the laws of logic?
But then that leads to trivial again. It leads to the same problem.
If you negate one of those, either one.
If you negate either one of them, it will end up being that the second premise is the conclusion, and it will be begging the question. So
yeah, I understand. I understand what you're saying.
Really, it means that you've got to go back to the drawing board here. My helpful suggestion is abandon ever saying dichotomy and disjunctive syllogism is my way of arguing for God's existence. Abandon that. That's done. It's not even a sinking ship. It's a sunk ship. It's done, right? Then what you want to do is how do I make this argument? Well, what you have to do is much messier, and it's not really logical. It's conceptual. It's philosophical. Forget disjunctive syllogism. Forget logical dichotomy. Then they're not going to help you. That's my point, I suppose. If anything, if you remember anything
I understand what
I'm saying to you now,
I got it. I understand.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed that
I understand.
you spent a large amount of time, not saying it was wasted time. So I think a lot of it though was where you were focusing in on was the way he was phrasing it, and Matt was focusing on what he was thinking, and so there's that disconnect.
Logic isn't about the content of what you're saying. It's only about the form of what you're saying. It doesn't so. That's why I'm saying, I'm always trying to say, look, forget about God or not God, whatever. Just think about it as P or not P, because arguments are valid if the form of the argument is valid. It's not valid if the content of the argument makes it valid. In fact, that's really the essence of the fallacy of special pleading.
What I'm saying is we can have a logically valid statement that's not true.
Yes, but my point was that if what you're talking about is logic, then all that matters is whether the argument is valid or not. And when you're talking about that, all that matters is whether the form is valid. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. And that's what, if you want to think logically, that's what you have to do. You have to abstract, to use Matt's favorite phrase, abstract from the content. Just think about the form. As I said right at the beginning of this, logic is the science of valid inference. You're inferring the conclusion from the premises. And look, that's logic.